Welcome back. Most of the other videos we've had in this series are about discussion type questions that we might have to invite our Muslim friends to look at the Bible with us and think about some different biblical topics. These questions in the next slide are different. They're more confrontational, challenge, polemical type questions, you might say. But they're still asked in love. They're not angry. There's just more of a challenge type of question. Now, I will warn you very carefully that these questions will put your life in danger if you ask them to Muslims in many parts of the world. You will literally be charged with blasphemy, put in jail, and killed. However, they're important for Muslims to know about. They're important for Christians to know about. There's a time and a place for us to use these questions at the right time, as Jesus sometimes used polemical questions and as his disciples did, and so on. So all of the information for these questions is available on the internet as of today in 2021. However, the links are blocked and censored in many parts of the world, and simply sharing the links can put your life in danger. I would encourage you to save the information to your computer, put it on a CD, put it on a little memory card or something, because it will probably be censored from the internet at some point in the future. So it's important to know about these things. So I would also encourage you not to start with this information in your relationship with your Muslim friend. Most of the time, get to know them, have dinner with them, spend time, playing sports with them. Just really show love to them in lots of practical ways. Don't start with this information, but there is a time and place in some conversations to pull this information out and gently, lovingly challenge your Muslim friend with this, understanding that you might be in danger if you use this information. So here are some more confrontational type questions, and let's just get into it. So, are there any original, complete manuscripts of the Quran in existence today, from Uthman's time? If so, which ones? Do they show any differences to the modern Quran? The answer is no. There are no Quranic or Uthmanic manuscripts. However, most Muslims don't know that, and a lot of the manuscripts, the Samarkand and the Tashkent and Sana'a manuscript, a lot of these manuscripts that are very old, Muslims think that they are actually all the way back to the time of Uthman, but they're not if you look into the details. So feel free to look at the supplement for all this information, and you can search on the internet for more. Another one, why did the Qiblas of the earliest 17 mosques built in the first 100 years or so after Muhammad all point to the city of Petra instead of the city of Mecca? Petra is 600 miles north of Mecca. So basically the archaeological evidence compiled by, I believe it's Gibson and others, have indicated that all of these old mosques were pointing toward Petra. And, theoretically from the Islamic point of view, that's strange. It should have been pointing toward Mecca. So it's showing that there's something missing or questionable about the early Islamic history before the time of Abd al-Malik and those later mosques. The later mosques all do point toward Mecca. And there's actually a time in between when the different dynasties started ruling, where the Qiblas, the little spot in the mosque that points toward Mecca, was actually pointing toward a spot halfway between Petra and Mecca. So you can read more about this at the details. Why is there no manuscript evidence of a complete Quran before 791, or archaeological or coin evidence of the Quran? Or archaeological evidence of Mecca being a major trade city for the first 69 years after Muhammad's death. And then when Abd al-Malik came to power, he built the Dome of the Rock, and then you started to see some of those verses of the Quran showing up on the Dome of the Rock inside there. But basically, the manuscript evidence, the evidence of the coins, there's so much that does not fit the standard narrative about those first decades. The Mecca was not on the early maps because there's no water there. It just doesn't make sense for there. It was not a major trade city, and the history actually bears that out. Another question, do you trust the historical biographies about Muhammad, that they actually record the details of his life, even though they're written 120 years afterwards? That's the first one, Sirat Rasul Allah by Ibn Ishaq. But actually, we don't even have that, right? We have the excerpts from it that were preserved by his disciple, I believe it's Ibn Hisham, which was about many decades later in the 830s. So if our friend trusts the biographies which were written 120 to 200 years after Muhammad, and by the way, we can ask them, have you ever read those biographies? Because there's some stuff in there that's pretty shocking about Muhammad's life. But anyway, if they trust these, written 120, 200 years later, how does that compare with the biographies and the records about Jesus, which were written by his disciples 20 to 60 years after Jesus, while eyewitnesses were still alive, to discuss what they had seen and heard? And you're welcome to look at my other videos, which look at the New Testament history in more detail there. Another one, why did the Quran borrow ancient myths from earlier literature with no distinction between actual biblical history versus myth? Most Muslims are not aware that some of these stories, like Jesus making birds out of clay, speaking from the cradle as an infant, a lot of these stories actually came from apocryphal gospels. There's some stories that are borrowed from Jewish apocryphal literature. So yeah, you look at the sources of the Quran, check out the links on the supplement. Why did the Quran borrow these things and present them as truth with no distinction between the actual history versus the myth? A very controversial question. Do you think that Muhammad's life is a good example for people to follow? And there's so much you can go into there. Have you ever read his biography? Have you ever read the hadiths about his life? Sahih Bukhari, I've heard that he collected something like 700,000 sayings about Muhammad. This is about 200 years after Muhammad, so a lot of literature had grown up. And then he whittled it down to about 6,000 or 7,000 sayings in his books. And even there's some duplication, but he tried to pick the ones that had the most reliable chain of narrators, the isnad, from the people who originally spoke it, and then the people who memorized that and passed it down to their student, and so on. And so Sahih, this is part of the Al-Sittah, the most respected 6 collections of hadith, along with Muslim and so on. And Sahih means good quality, the best quality, reliable. So if you read those stories that are in Bukhari, there's a lot of shocking material, and a lot of Muslims have never really bothered to read that. You can ask them, what do you think about the specific story? And this is very controversial, but there's a series called Islamicize Me on YouTube. Currently, it's up as of today, where this David Wood goes through and looks at what these hadiths say and puts together a little comedy skit about what 30 days in the life would be, trying to follow all these hadith sayings exactly. And he gets into some escapades with that. So it's jarring, I'm sure, for Muslims to see what's in their actual hadith literature. Now, some Muslims will say, we don't believe that. We don't believe that hadith. We don't believe in Bukhari, whatever. We're Shia. But most of them need some sort of hadith to explain where these verses came from in the Quran, the history of the Quran. So it's kind of a dilemma for Muslims that, they need some sort of history. And if they're not going to believe in the hadith, what are they going to do? So anyway, it's worth discussing. This next video, Muhammad versus Jesus, judging religions by their central figures, is extremely controversial. Because David pulls together a lot of hadiths, a lot of scriptures, and compares them directly. Muhammad did this, Jesus did that. And so, yeah, do you think that Muhammad's life is a good example for people to follow? And I think it's worth discussing in some contexts. Now, again, if you pull this video up in certain countries, you'll be killed. But in other countries, you might be able to expose your Muslim friend to what the Islamic traditions actually say about Muhammad, and ask this question of whether he was a good example or not. And then you compare him to Jesus. Jesus is beautiful. He's just the best example in every way. So yes, let's look at Jesus even more. I would encourage you to look at the supplement, and I'll post more links. You can find out more information about the historical aspects from Jay Smith and his colleagues, and a lot of other websites will tell you more information about the Islamic history and the Bible and its history. So may God bless you as you lovingly, gently share the gospel with your Muslim friends.